So a brand new study just dropped claiming that it finally debunks the Shroud of Turin. Cicero Moraes, a Brazilian expert renowned for reconstructing historical faces in stunning detail, decided to digitally simulate exactly how a cloth, like the shroud, would drape over different objects, specifically a real human body versus a sort of shallow sculpture.
This is where I went from being a shroud skeptic. Many thinkers believe that he died of suffocation, asphyxiation because of pulmonary edema, and we see that pulmonary edema reflected both on the shroud cloth and on the Sudarian of Oviedo, the face cloth.
Did the Shroud of Turin finally get debunked? Well, we're going to be reacting to a few of amazing YouTubers. First of all, Capturing Christianity, he talks about the debunction type thing. And then Tucker Carlson has on Jeremiah Johnson on his show. This new study doesn't debunk anything. It doesn't debunk the Bible, doesn't debunk the Shroud of Turin. So let's get right into it.
So a brand new study just dropped claiming that it finally debunks the Shroud of Turin, one of Christianity's most revered relics. Brazilian 3D expert Cicero Moraes says that he can now prove that the shroud never wrapped a real human body, let alone the body of Jesus Christ. Using state-of-the-art digital modeling, Moraes shows how the shroud's strikingly clear image perfectly matches what you'd expect from a cloth draped over a flat sculpture, not a three-dimensional corpse. The internet has completely lit up. Media headlines are super dramatic, as you might expect, and skeptics are now calling it game over. But as compelling as Moraes' findings seem, there is a huge problem here, a critical flaw in his analysis that most reports have completely missed. And today we're diving into exactly what Moraes got right, what he got wrong, and why the Shroud of Turin might yet have survived another attempt to bury it. Hey, I'm Cameron Bertuzzi, and welcome to Capturing Christianity, where we expose the intellectual side of Christian belief. If you're new here, hit subscribe and buckle up, because this one is going to be both fascinating and actually visually stunning. All right, before we unpack all the very juicy details of Moraes' controversial study, let's briefly catch you up on why the Shroud of Turin matters so much to so many people. The shroud is widely believed to be the actual burial cloth of Jesus that wrapped the crucified body of Jesus Christ. It shows the hauntingly detailed image of a man bearing wounds exactly matching those described in the Gospels: pierced wrists, scourged back, wounds on the head from thorns, and even bloodstains consistent with Roman crucifixion. For decades, researchers have been fascinated by this relic. It's not just Christians who are intrigued by this. Even skeptics admit that the shroud is unlike anything we've ever seen in history. Its image isn't painted. There's no pigment, no dye, no ink. The image itself penetrates only the outermost surface fibers. It's incredibly superficial, thinner than a human hair. And perhaps
thinking about this, there's so many things that blows me away. Just forget about this 3D model. To understand how in the world would any of these paintings or marks or bloodstains or whatever get on the cloth in the first place is just mind-blowing. Keep that in mind.
Most intriguingly, it actually encodes three-dimensional information, something completely unique in historical artifacts. In other words, it's not just an image, it's a kind of mysterious 3D photographic negative that no one has ever convincingly replicated, even with today's robust scientific technology.
Right. So now we're going to get into the study here.
Shroud of Turin. Cicero Moraes, a Brazilian expert renowned for reconstructing historical faces in stunning detail, decided to digitally simulate exactly how a cloth, like the shroud, would drape over different objects, specifically a real human body versus a sort of shallow sculpture, like a medieval bas-relief. First, Moraes carefully built a digital 3D model of a human body, matching the proportions of the figure in the shroud. A male, approximately 33 years old, thin, and around 5 feet 11 inches tall. That's actually exactly how tall I am. He then meticulously posed this digital figure to mirror the exact positioning of the shroud image, as you can see in this figure. Now here's where it gets interesting. Moraes took a digital linen cloth, accurately sized, and ran a fabric dynamic simulation, basically letting gravity drop the virtual cloth onto this 3D body digitally. After mapping the contact points, he flattened the digital cloth to see what kind of image that it produced. The results? They were actually pretty striking, but maybe not what shroud believers ever wanted to see. The simulation showed an image heavily distorted and widened. Moraeus likened it to Agamemnon's mask, the famously flattened golden mask from ancient Greece, where the face and body appear stretched unnaturally. This was nothing like the slim, proportional figure seen on the shroud. Then Moraeus tried a different approach, a shallow sort of bas-relief sculpture, simulating how medieval artists often worked. He repeated the same fabric simulation, and the result was astonishingly different. The imprint was clear, detailed, and precisely proportional, as you can see in this image. When overlaid onto actual images of the shroud, Moraeus found a near-perfect match. He concluded, the pattern corresponds more to a low-relief origin than to the volumetry of a real human body. According to Moraeus, this means the shroud is almost certainly the product of medieval craftsmanship, created by applying pigment or heat to the raised surfaces of a shallow sculpture.
So he says you could apply pigment and heat to get this type of painting type shadow type markings on this cloth. But how does he explain the blood? Guys, there's blood types on this cloth. How does he explain the cloth being dated back to 2,000 years ago? How does he explain the pollen that is found exactly around Israel? There's so many things that are not adding up here.
He even pointed out how common bas-relief funerary art was during the medieval period, particularly around the time the shroud actually first surfaced historically. His conclusion was very clear and very blunt. The remote possibility of the shroud being a print from a three-dimensional human body still remains. So in other words, Moraeus thinks it's almost virtually impossible for the shroud to be genuine. So is this truly the knockout blow that skeptics claim that it is? Before shroud believers throw in the towel, there's an enormous problem that Moraeus' research didn't address. Something so crucial, it might completely change how we interpret his results. Before we get to that fatal flaw, let's actually quickly cover what his critics are saying about this new research. Okay, almost immediately after Moraeus' study dropped, scholars pointed out several key oversights. Russ Brolt, a shroud lecturer and researcher, flatly said this, quote, "The work of Cicero Moraeus offers no new information that we didn't already know before." And he's actually right about this. Okay, shroud experts have known for decades that a simple cloth-to-body contact couldn't produce the image that we see on the shroud. Moraeus himself even acknowledged that he didn't address the microscopic or chemical characteristics of the image. He focused strictly on geometry and distortion. So here's why this matters. Okay, studies from the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, back in 1978, already demonstrated conclusively that there's no pigment, dye, or scorch marks causing the image. The image itself penetrates only the very outermost fibers, an impossible feat for medieval artists.
Right. To think, though, that someone would say, oh yeah, medieval people could have done this. Easy work. They just had to have that flattened sculpture, and then there you go. Voila, we're good. Debunked, cloth debunked, whatever. But that's just not how it works. It's crazy.
STURP showed that the bloodstains came first, before the body image was formed. Oh. How could a medieval forger possibly accomplish that kind of precision? And here's something even more significant that Moraeus didn't consider, the so-called cloth collapse hypothesis, proposed by physicist Dr. John Jackson. Jackson theorized that a radiant burst of energy during the resurrection could have projected the body's image vertically onto the cloth without lateral distortion. So in other words, Moraeus assumed that the image had to result from direct contact, which shroud scientists have known for decades simply isn't the case. 3D imaging expert Ray Downing, known for his Real Face of Jesus documentary, summarized it bluntly. Moraeus used off-the-shelf 3D software to state the obvious and grab headlines, without addressing the deeper mysteries like the perfect encoding of subtle 3D data, no residual materials on the cloth, or how parts of the image formed without even touching the body. Having heard now from the critics, let's now turn to the critical flaw in Moraeus' research. As compelling as Moraeus' visuals might seem, his research overlooks one of the most puzzling and famous features of the shroud, the digital negative phenomenon. Let's slow down for a second because, well, what exactly do we mean by digital negative? Well, when you snap a photo on an old school film camera, what you first see is a negative image, something like this.
Hey.
Notice how the lights and darks are actually reversed. Light areas look dark, Dark areas look bright. Now, when you reverse these tones or invert these tones, the result is a positive image that your eye recognizes immediately. In 1898, the photographer Secundo Pia took the first ever photograph of the shroud, expecting a sort of ordinary relic photo, but when he actually looked at the negative plate, he was stunned. Staring back at him wasn't this vague silhouette that he anticipated, but a very clear, lifelike portrait. Absolutely amazingly, the negative of the shroud became the positive portrait of the mysterious man that it depicted. It's like the shroud itself was already some kind of photographic negative. No one...
That's just insane. There's so many miracles, unexplainable things that go into the Shroud of Turin to make you sit back and think, okay, obviously there's some miracles going on. Obviously there's something that we can't explain and it defies the laws of physics and the laws of nature. We're not denying that. So this 3D model is nothing. So now we're going to go to Tucker Carlson and Jonathan Jeremiah here, talk about this very, very astounding evidence.
What kind of testing has been done, scientific testing?
That is such a great question. This is where I went from being a shroud skeptic, because I was conditioned in Oxford in my residency that we deny miracles, we deny anything supernatural. Oxford is really a factory for creating apostate Bible scholars, by and large. I can say that having been there and been in faculty of theology in Keble College. I know that's not popular, but it's true. I would often go home to my flat in Summertown after reading the Greek New Testament with my cohort, and I would ask my wife, Audrey, am I the only one who actually believes in Jesus in this group? And that's okay. Wow. And I was conditioned that this is a Catholic relic. There's no historicity behind this. It's a joke. And I was conditioned by that. And then I was scary. And this is why your voice is so important, Tucker. So many people, they know enough to be dangerous. They're TikTok smart or they're YouTube smart. They have a soundbite, but they have no substance to their faith. And I want to have a substance to my faith. I'm a truth addict. I follow truth wherever it leads. And my pastor, Jack Graham, began encouraging me to just look into the primary sources for the shroud, not to pay attention to the blogosphere, but to pay attention to what do the scientists actually tell us. And once I began to look at the scientific studies that undergird all of the facts I'm sharing with you, I remember it took my breath away. The evidence was so compelling. So to answer your excellent question, given that framework, 102 scientific disciplines have studied the shroud and produced peer-reviewed journals, studies, and cases for all the different aspects. And when I tell you it's the most studied artifact in the world, I mean it. 102 academic disciplines have spent 600,000 scientific hours, like my friend Paul DeLazzo, studying the lasers, like my friend Bruno Barberis, the mathematician from University of Turin, not a theologian, not a preacher, great guy, good friend of mine. Bruno is a mathematician, and he took all of the excellent questions you're asking me, the correspondence of how do we know he was crucified? How was he crucified? What blood type? Crown of thorns, nail print hands, nail scarred side, nail prints in the calcaneus, the heel, which is interesting. We'll talk about that. The scourge marks and then the patibulum abrasions, the crossbeam. When he factored all of those probabilities together, Bruno Barberis, the mathematician, said there is a 1 in 200 billion chance it's anyone other than Jesus of Nazareth.
Wow. 1 in 200 billion chance that that's anyone other than Jesus. Guys, and when this new study came out and said, oh, it's debunked, and it was nothing new. Like he said, it's been studied over 600,000 hours. Like everything, all the possibilities have been studied for a reason, because there's unexplainable things.
1 in 200 billion. I like my odds.
Because the physical... the representations in this image track so precisely to
with
the
scripture.
Accounts.
Exactly. Not only with scripture, but with what we know of crucifixion from Josephus, from Philo, from all of the other first century historians as well.
What do you mean there are holes in his heels?
Yeah, this is amazing.
Can you describe crucifixion? What was it?
Yes.
What was the purpose? How did they die?
Crucifixion was the most heinous way to die. It turns out humans are really good at figuring out terrible, tragic ways how to destroy ourselves. And
yes.
Crucifixion brings that to a fever pitch. The Persians likely invented it. Alexander the Great, who gives us the language of the Bible, Koine Greek, he also made crucifixion fashionable throughout his Hellenization of the world. The Romans come along and they take crucifixion that they learned from Greek Hellenization and they perfect it for 700 years. Remember, Josephus tells us that during the Jewish revolt, AD 66 to 70, Titus and Vespasian are crucifying 500 Jews a day.
Wow.
And so they were experts. Now, it wasn't like they had a crucifixion manual. There were 30 provinces in the empire during the time of Jesus. Remember, we have Pontius Pilate, who's governor. We have first Augustus, who's emperor. And then we have the other emperors who followed during the time of Jesus. There's 30 provinces. And the provinces would practice crucifixion in different ways. But it was in the Syrian province where Judea was, where it was particularly heinous. I already mentioned we have 21 different records of crucifixion with nail piercing. Nails were iron. I actually have a nail artifact that I'm going to show you. In fact, this is a great time to do that. I want you to hold the replica of the crucifixion nail. This is a crucifixion nail. It was circular on top, and then it was actually a spike. It was an iron spike, and the Romans would drive this crucifixion nail through the wrists, through the palm area, and then through the heel, the calcaneus. Our heels are very brittle, and so they had to be very accurate when they would pin someone to the cross. And they
Oh my goodness. I just can't imagine that. The pain and agony, the things that Jesus went through to pay the price that we deserved. It's so crazy, guys.
straddle the heels on either side of what was called, there you have the patibulum, and then you have the cross beam, then you have the center vertical beam, and the heels would be fastened straddling the beam. And the victim would be crucified completely naked. There was no loincloth. I know we see that represented in traditional Christian art, but Jesus would have been crucified naked because the Romans were saying something with this. The Romans were saying, don't ever defy us. You know, we are the truth. And remember, Augustus was called the Son of God. And so when Mark comes along and says, no, Jesus is the Son of God, I mean, those were seditious words for the time because Augustus was called the Son of God. When Augustus gave good news, it was called the gospel. Christianity takes that term euangelion. No, it's not the gospel of Augustus. It's not the gospel of the Roman Empire. It's not Pax Romana. No, this is the gospel of the true Son of God, Jesus Christ, who rose from the dead. And so he's crucified, and
so crucifixion was, I mean, at least one gospel account describes the other men on either side as criminals or rebels, but
malefactors.
Zealots, most likely, I would say. People thought that they were trying to revolt, rebels, trying to show if you mess with Rome, you're in trouble. It's no joke.
Who got crucified?
Well, this is interesting. It turns out we really hate to crucify slaves, and we want to do it in the worst way possible. That was the Roman view. And so non-Roman citizens, however, we do have citizens like Antigonus, the last of the Hasmonean rulers, who's a Roman citizen, but he defies Rome. This guy named Mark Antony, who becomes Augustus, crucifies Antigonus in a really despicable way. He actually beheads him first and then crucifies him. We have all of his remains. It's interesting because these crucifixion nails were thought to be something like amulets, phylacteries. They were thought to bring you good luck. And what's interesting is crucifixion nails were reused again and again. So the very nails that pinned Jesus to the cross had probably been used many times before that to kill other Roman victims.
Because, ironwork is expensive.
Right. And again, the Romans, they were a slave machine. They knew how to kill people. They knew how to enslave. 40% of the empire were slaves. And so they had to know how to crucify them. And so you have this slave crucifying machine that is the Roman Empire. And then if you were a citizen but you defied the empire, you would be crucified too.
How does crucifixion kill a man?
It's really interesting.
Were women crucified, by the way?
Yes. In fact, they were crucified naked, often facing towards the cross, just for pornographic reasons.
Wow.
Ugh. How does it kill you?
it kills you in a variety of ways. It doesn't kill you quickly. It maximizes torment while minimizing it actually maximizes the length of death, and it prolongs death. And so when we studied the blood work, so there are some amazing hematological reports that I've enjoyed reading thoroughly. There's high levels of creatinine, which means he was suffering from kidney failure, high levels of ferritin. His body had inflammation all over it. He was dehydrated. You read John's Gospel. Remember in John's Gospel, Jesus, one of the 7 sayings, I thirst, he's dehydrated.
Yeah, and they're getting all of this from the Shroud of Turin. They're getting all of in these blood samples. You can see the type of agony and the pain that whoever this was going through. And it all points to Jesus. That's what's so amazing.
You know that Jesus likely lost 1/3 of his blood volume during flagellation. So he was dying of a variety of things. Many thinkers believe that he died of suffocation, asphyxiation because of pulmonary edema. And we see that pulmonary edema reflected both on the shroud cloth and on the sudarian of Oviedo, the face cloth. It's 6 parts pulmonary edema, 1 part blood. Again, a hoaxer is not going to make this stuff up. I mean, it becomes so crazy.
Pulmonary edema, so your lungs fill with fluid.
Fluid, blood, and a mixture. In fact, there is a translucent mixture of fluid around the side wound. We looked at the side wound there. Between rib 5 and 6, just above that triangle, which is really a patch from a burn hole. There's actually a translucent serum around that again is consistent with what John's Gospel said. Blood and water flowed out of Jesus because he was already dead. And so the crucifixion would prolong that. High levels of ferritin, high levels of creatinine. Jesus is suffering liver failure, kidney failure. His body has inflammation all over it. I believe, though, that Jesus died of cardiac arrest, massive heart failure, congenital heart failure, because he has labored breathing. We know all of this from the blood samples.
The New Testament, one account says that his tormentors wanted him off the cross by the Sabbath, by Passover.
Okay, that's also fascinating. This is what's so fascinating to me. And why in the world would people agree with this guy who says it's debunked? Because of the blood samples. Obviously, if there's a blood sample that can't be a sculpture, what are you talking about? This is obviously a human being, but the problem is, how in the world did the print of Jesus get on there? It's a miracle. That's just what it is. So I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments down below, whatever that may be. Love and appreciate you all. Always, guys, remember to like and subscribe. In the description below, you could click a link to help you to decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today, guys. It will be the best decision you could ever make. Always remember, guys, Jesus loves you.